Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, of the Macondo Literary Festival. Imagine future and maps, okay? And I think I want to welcome our panelists first. I don't know if that is strategic that we have Ukutula playing, in the background, of course, because we have a South African writer, and we also have Jennifer, who's an East African writer from Uganda. And so I wanted to start by introducing Masande, who's right next to me. And as people come in, and what I wanted to do was just to introduce him from, what we have at the back of his book. And because, one of the things I really like to do is to bandy the books around so that people can buy them, okay? And so that you can see that there's exciting things in there, okay? So, Masande Ntshanga, welcome to Nairobi,
Thank
to my
you.
city, okay? And I must confess that I have just read his books. And so for me, this is very exciting, that Macondo always manages to surprise me by bringing amazing new writers and not so new writers and, getting us to read beyond our comfort zone, okay? And so Masande, from Cape Town, was the winner of the inaugural PEN International New Voices Award in 2013 and a finalist for the Kane Prize in 2015. Okay. He's also won the Betty Trask Award, for his first novel, which we have here, and which is also out there at the Prestige stand, and it's called The Reactive. Okay. So it just arrived on Thursday. So if you can get your copy, please do so. Okay. And then he was born in East London, okay, and I will be asking him about names like East London in South Africa, okay, and graduated, with a degree in film and media, English studies from the University of Cape Town, was a creative writing fellow in which he completed his master's under the Mellon Foundation. He's received a Fulbright Award, and much more. And his work has appeared in the White Review, in one of my favorite journals, Chimurenga, and he's now got 2 novels, and that's the first one I've shown you is this, The Reactive, and then there's this one, Triangulum, okay? So please feel free to buy these out there after this session. And I can tell you that they're exciting novels because I have read them in the last 3 days, okay? So totally exciting novels. Masande, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. And then our second panelist, Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. Now, I first met Jennifer, and I had seen Modoni here earlier, but I think she's taken off. I first met Jennifer at a Story Moja event. Actually, I'm not sure whether it was a Kwani event or a Story Moja event, but I think I've met you then twice. Yeah. And one of the exciting things about Jennifer is that she wrote. Kintu over there.
The first woman. There's the first one.
Oh, right. Okay.
Somebody in the audience has a Kintu.
I had a copy of Kintu. Now, I met her when she had just won the manuscript award, which Kwani had put out for her manuscript called Kintu. And I was really jealous because, Jennifer said this manuscript had been lying there under her bed for years. And when Kwani put out this call, she dusted it off and sent it in.
I did.
And voila, the rest is history. How amazing is that? And so I think also for me, this moment serves as a reflection on just some of the amazing things that have happened in the literary world I guess during my lifetime, okay? So totally amazing. And then she has a PhD in creative writing from Lancaster University, okay? And she was also longlisted for the Ntshanga Prize in 2014 for K2. Now, one of her stories, Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Why didn't you just kind of read it?
Can I give you mine?
This is stronger. Oh, that's stronger. Yeah. Okay.
Mic test. Check 1, 2.
Thank you. Hello. Oh my goodness. This is really sharp. Okay. I can hear myself breathe. Okay. So oh wow. Okay, now I've disturbed the baby. This is awful. Okay. Anyway, so her short story, Let's Tell This Story Properly, which is included in this collection of hers called Manchester Happened. Okay. Won the 2014 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Okay. And then in 2018, she was awarded the prestigious Wyndham Campbell Prize for Fiction to support her writing. Okay. And she is a lecturer at the Manchester Metropolitan University, where she teaches creative writing. And so I'd really like to welcome, Jennifer, who I feel is kind of Kenyan and,
Absolutely.
Yeah, because she's East African and she is a very strong part of our literary scene here.
And a few of these girls are my nieces.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome. Yeah. Welcome, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Now, I know this is day 3 of the festival, so I know people are probably exhausted and have heard a lot about writing and about literature and about the craft and about everything else. And so I'm going to be, leading this by asking a few questions, but we will make it conversational.
Yeah.
I know yesterday when I was eavesdropping, somebody asked a question and I had Jennifer saying, we answered that already. And I thought, oops, okay. So if there's anything that's familiar already, but, we'll probably be doing a deeper dive into some of the issues. Maybe that's what we can be able to do this morning. All right? Okay. And so let me begin. And, one of the things that Aminata Foreigner said yesterday in her conversation was that the past may yet become the future. Okay? And so this morning, as I was coming in, I went via the office. I sit at an art center called the Go Down Art Center. And we've had that picture there on my right, which I brought in because it's an artist's imagination of what the African future is. It was from an Africa Futures exhibition. And why I brought this one in was because this artist, Cyrus Kabiru, is a Kenyan artist, but this particular print and the exhibition's actually at the Zeitz in Cape Town, which is the home of Masande over here. So I thought this would actually make him feel at home because I'm hosting them in my living room, okay? So a picture from his sitting. But, these are the kind of things that, we're looking at now as futuristic. And yet, when I showed this same picture at home, they told me, that reminded somebody of an artist called Bootsy Collins. Does any of you remember an artist called Bootsy Collins from the 70s? No. Now, there used to be a group called Parliament Funkadelic, or P-Funk. Yeah, and Bootsy used to play the guitar. And he had all kinds of star shaped things. But that kind of really reminded me of that. And I was going to bring the LP cover just to show the generation that does not even know what an LP is. But then I got late, so I had to dash. But, so Cyrus, Kenyan artist, sitting in Cape Town, imagining the future. But the question I want to ask both of you is, what drives this African interest in future? And I'm coming from the context of what's wrong with the present? Yeah, what's wrong with the present? Yeah, Masande?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming as well. I see we have a full house and I really appreciate that. You know, in South Africa, East Africa remains this really shining star in our literary canon. So it's a great honor and privilege to be here and to have conversations about writing, you know? I think for me, what drives an interest, I can't speak in general for this surge of an interest in African futures, but I can speak to why it interests me as a writer specifically. And that is because, for me, it's something that is tied, actually, to the present and also to the past. And I'm invested in it, in our future, because essentially, one, I am an African. And I'm invested in what happens to us, you know, going forward. And I think the reason why I became fascinated with writing in the genre of speculative fiction was to try and actually, it was a number of things really. One, it was in a kind of protest in terms of how the West has always imagined our realities and always also had free reign in rewriting our histories and also imagining not only our future, but the future of humankind. And so it was actually quite deliberate for me to embark on a project that centered Africa as an agent that could imagine a future world and even save it, actually. So part of it was resistance. And then another part of it was that I actually believe that people who are more removed from the center, as it were, are able to see with a lot more clarity. And I think it's probably a matter of perspective. And if I was going to look to the future, I think I would look to the people who are actually inhabiting the present in a way in which the center might be oblivious. And the solutions aren't going to come from the center, I believe, but instead are going to come from the people who are the most marginalized and who experience this reality that we're in right now, the most painfully and the most immediately. So that is kind of like what drew me to speculative fiction and also drew me to imagining an African future.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Can you ask the question again?
Okay. What is it that drives this African interest in the future? Okay. And you're reflecting from, you know, the present. What's wrong with the present?
We are restless. I don't know whether you've noticed, but Africans are so restless. And it's not just in movement, but we want, when you look at especially the young generation, they just want the whole world. Africa is not enough anymore. They want the whole world. But at the same time, there's a way they are carrying Africa with them in a way that no one else had imagined, okay? But also, there's a sense that our time, you know that song, African Time? You don't? Oh, God.
You can give us a line.
It's Nigerian, and it starts with a bang. Mm-hmm. You know, so when I first heard it, I was writing, and I would just get up and dance, because it's African time. You know, everywhere in Europe, when I go in shops, you hear Nigerian music. Patterns and designs of clothing in Europe influenced by African patterns. But you're beginning to see African talent shine. And there's something about Africans that when they are talented, they are ridiculous. They don't know where to stop, you know. You just sit there and say, yeah, that's an African. But there's a way, I think Africa is emerging from underneath that cloud that the West had written, or the rest of the world had put. It wasn't real, but they had put over Africa and they were not saying. And now Africa, because it is writing itself, it is singing itself, it's conversing with itself, now people are saying, you know. And it's as if we are like, step out of the way. It's African time. But also, the rest of the world are not surprising us anymore, you know? They're not doing anything. Like, oh, that's amazing. But you come, I leave Europe and I come here, and I'm, what the hell? So I've just been to the market, the Maasai market, you know? And as I walked with a friend, I saw these trays, you know, the tray you use to carry glasses, and they were in African print. And they said, what the hell? I mean, who sat down and imagined that a tray could be in African print? And this is just the market, but this is how imaginative Africa is. And once we started to consume ourselves, because now my generation, we grew up on Madonna and all those singers. Africans, you ask them, they're like, excuse me, do you know so-and-so? They know Nigerian, they know South African, they are consuming themselves, you know? And we are at conversation with ourselves. But most of all, what has shocked me is, okay, I'm working on a novel that is doing similar things. But yesterday we had a panel, and people were talking about things that I'm writing about. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not going to surprise anybody. Anymore, so I need to finish it quickly. But I thought I was being original. But this, first of all, has been about Africa, that Africa I'm writing about. So obviously I'm not the only one. Everybody is like, we're going ahead, and anybody else stepping our way, get out of the way.
Oh, thank you. Fashion. I was just thinking, this morning, as you know, I was putting on something to come here, you know, that, you know, what I selected is actually a really, really old African mud cloth. But this has been rendered by an African designer, Kenyan designer, and one of the designers was telling me she doesn't know how she did this tie and dye to get that mud cloth feel, you know, to the fabric. And so I was thinking, oh my goodness, yes, I am reveling in this African moment in time, in ways, you know, that are really unexpected. But the other thing I will say about Africa is that it surprises one, because the earrings I selected for my fashion accessory, I actually met the designer outside, and she's a German friend of mine called Marie Rose, and she does the most amazing African jewelry. You know, so, and, you know, to me, she's Kenyan because she's lived here for the longest time. And, you know, she's made a huge impact in this area. So again, Africa surprising one, you know, constantly. But, you know, my second, you know, area of thought, and you may have seeped into it, Jennifer, already, is this one, that the reality of Africa has been so fictionalized. It is difficult to sort out the fact from the fiction. This is a quote I got from Achille Mbembe, who's also a professor in South Africa. And so, you know, where does this then place the fictionalized imagination? Okay, how do you even imagine beyond this? How do you then go back to those familiarities reassurances, complications of a past that has itself been imagined. Yeah.
I think for me personally, the first point of departure would be in interrogating what is actually meant by fact. You know, the way that Africa has been imagined historically has been from an outsider's perspective, and in a way that actually doesn't really serve not only our imagination, customs, ways of thinking, but also our interpretation of the world and what matters about that interpretation. And I really like what Jennifer was saying about it being surprising, because I think it's not surprising just in terms of our creativity, but it's surprising in terms of how we can imagine, you know, the future of humankind and reimagine this relationship that people have with the planet. And I'm reminded, for example, about an environmental activist that I met earlier this year, Oluoch-Olunya, and she advocates for climate justice in the Eastern Cape, which is also my ancestral home. And one of the things that she does, which I think are absolutely phenomenal, is fighting against these oil companies, which are trying to extract minerals just outside of the ancestral village. And what's important is that the interlocutors, the people who are working between these foreign multinationals and this village are actually our own politicians. And their way of imagining the world is that this is creating jobs, and therefore it's bringing in development. And what Nontle does is to question what is development actually. Because for them, the ocean is actually very sacred because it's where traditionally our ancestors reside. And one of the really incredible things that I heard her speak about that they did actually was, as they were constructing one of these rigs, they actually had people who swam out of the village into the ocean and dismantled them. Yeah, much to the anger of, you know, our government, which is a black government, a post-liberation government, but which has lost touch with that way of imagining the world in the way that we used to, you know, and that's something that extends itself as well to our relationship with the planet, to extraction, to understanding that it's something that's actually quite sacred and valuable and finite as well, you know, not just a resource from which to acquire wealth under the guise of development. So, yeah, I think I really like that. And I think with this vehicle specifically of speculative fiction, we can bring in those sensibilities. And I think that's something that not only we can benefit from, but also the rest of the world, because it's currently in decline.
Thank you. Jennifer?
You know what, I'm not so worried about Africa being fictionalized, especially that fiction that came from the West, because now we keep surprising them. You know, there was when I was in Britain, and when I just arrived and made a few friends from Britain, and we were all students, and sometimes they would introduce me. This is Jenny. Jenny's so intelligent. Oh my goodness. I know. And I used to think, oh, if only they knew how many millions of Ugandans who were far more intelligent than I am. But there was a sense that you meet an African who's intelligent, this is something out of the ordinary, you know. So I love shocking that world out of their fiction. Yeah. Okay? Because they've underestimated us so badly that we are going to keep on shocking them. But also, the other reason I'm not worried about fiction, because we do fictionalize ourselves as well. Because life is about myth making, you know, whether myth are at an individual level, whether it's a family myth, or whether it's a national myth. And when it comes to Africans, we do create a few myths. So one of the myths that have recently been debunked was the African woman, the African mother, and Mother African, you know, until women came along and said, you know what, stop putting us on a pedestal. We don't want that. And I also bandy in myth making. And I do think that you can't, if you can't get rid of myth, yeah, then you better come up with your own. So we kick out the myth, the fiction that was created about us. But, you know, often people create myths and then they live up to them. You have no idea, but then you do. Because the West is such a myth. You know, oh my God. I grew up with London Bridge, Buckingham Palace, the Ritz. And then I arrive in Britain and I say, where is London? You know what I'm talking about, yeah? Yeah, because this is what they sold to them. And I remember I was in Manchester and I went to a shop and I summoned my best English. And I asked a shopkeeper and I said, can I have some cooking aids? I said, where is she up to? I didn't even catch what he said. And then the person I was with said, she means spices. But I thought cooking aids, you know, was more English than spice. And you know, but the England that had been sold to me was upper class and middle class and spoke a certain English. And I went ahead and fell in love with a Mancunian person who has no idea that there's a past tense and present tense. And I was an English teacher and had no idea about plural and singular. And so we would be in the car and he would say, I should have went. And I turned around, you mean we should have gone? This is England and I am African and I'm just teaching my whatever. So this is the myth that I went with to Britain because it had been fictionalized to us in a particular way. So, but to say we get rid of the myth or the fictions, we're lying. We had better come up with our own. And that's what I do in my books.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Actually, this whole idea of the most intelligent African always reminds me of the Ghanaian writer, Aikwe Yama, you know, when he went to the US and he says, I know Kweku and, you know, whoever else at home, and this is just the most ridiculous, but he does give us a poem in which he tells us, you know, but what are myths but psychic feet and hands to get us from where we are to where we need to be. And I really love that line from Aikwe Ama. Okay, now talking about myth making, therefore, I want to take us interstellar because today we have with us a science fiction writer. Okay, and you know, I was just telling him when I was given my brief, you know, I couldn't believe it had landed on my lap because in February of this year, Dr. Mae Jemison, who's the first, and talking about first women, Jennifer, we had the first African-American woman astronaut come to Nairobi, and she was looking to have a partnership to run a conference. And so she partnered with us at the Go Down, and we did this science fiction conference, and she brought in, of course, the scientists, you know, the NASA scientist and all that. And, so we asked her why Kenya, why Nairobi? And she said, and we, of course, we also asked her what had she seen out there that it would make her want to come here. And she said, this is, I think, where you go, with the Triangulum, which is this Masande's most exciting book, Triangulum, which is the most distant star you can see with the naked eye. Now, she said she went up there, and when she looked back down, all right, there we were, all in one dot. You guys were all in here in the same space, in one minute dot far there in the distance, okay? But the other thing that happened is the answers weren't up there, or they weren't out there. And she said she ended up kind of introspecting. And when she went back home, and this is many years later, like 10 years later, she came back to the cradle of mankind to look for answers. And of course, for those who are non-Kenyan, we say the cradle of mankind, the cradle of mankind is here in the Great Rift Valley. But of course, Masande actually thinks it's in South Africa somewhere. But
we have one.
And I've told him over there, it's actually called Cradle of Mankind because the Cradle of Mankind was claimed by Kenya first because of all manner of copyright laws. So this is where we've reached. But so Masande, in this novel, in Triangulum, you have a trio and they're looking, for mom who has disappeared somewhere. And, one of their points of triangulation for me, what was really interesting, of course, I think they went to, there was the graveyard, there was the hospital, healing. So there's death, life, and then there is the cradle of mankind, origins. And I wanted you to reflect a little on this for us, this idea of the cradle of mankind. What does it mean, origins? What does it really mean for us?
Yeah, I think it's actually incredible because we were working very independently and I had absolutely no idea of her research when I was writing this book. But the more I worked on it, the more I realized that this destination was actually very important, not only in terms of the origins, alongside with Kenya's side of humankind as we know it, but also in how it determined South Africa's history as well. I have a part in the novel that I'd like to read, which I think explains it a lot better than I could, but the gist of it is that about billions of years ago, there was an asteroid that hit that part of the southern region of Africa. And what it did is that it warped that basin, right, creating what we know as the Vredefort crater, right? So it's literally an intervention from space. And what that basin did when it was warped is that it brought up these fossils of earlier humans, but also at the same time, it also brought up gold to the surface, which then allowed its discovery by colonists. And then after that, obviously South Africa became a mining state and a manufacturing state. There were machines, and then that would determine what would become even the modern state now. And for me, I always thought that there was an interesting fork in the road as I write in the novel. Because on one hand, there was the opportunity to understand ourselves better and our origins. And on the other, there was the opportunity which was then taken to create the structure, the Union of South Africa, which would eventually become the Republic of South Africa, which would be a site of a lot of bloodshed, a lot of suffering for extraction, and things that in the long term didn't really matter that much. So in the novel, there is a group of eco-terrorists who aim to destabilize modern South Africa, or rather South Africa in the recent future. And part of their doctrine is actually based on this, this fork in the road. And I want to read a little bit from one of the characters explaining this philosophy to the protagonist. So the group, they're called the Returners. And they believe that taking the path that went alongside industrialization was a mistake, not only for the continent, but for humanity in general. So it starts so. The Returners, Dee had told me the night before, after we'd returned to our table for another drink, were individuals whose concern for our landmass was storied and ran deep with regard to both its past and future. I was confused. I asked her if she meant the continent. In the end, the continent, the planet, yes. But for now, the tip we're sitting on. The past, I asked her. Think a billion years, think a billion and then add another billion. That's how long ago it was when an asteroid hit our planet, forming the Vredefort crater in the Free State. Here's what that means. The impact created a fork in the path for us. Us, I asked her. Humankind. It altered the course of human development in this region. Hominid fossils, ancient ones, were pushed closer to the Earth's surface, but then so was gold. Dee paused for a waiter to bring our bill. She went on. It was a test. That's what we believe. The path on the left or the path on the right. The impact revealed secrets to our ancestors about our origins through those fossils. But it also warped the basin in the north, allowing colonists to discover gold in 1886. I watched her mouth while she spoke. That began the purchasing of machines and petroleum en masse. That's not a secret. The consolidation of the Union of South Africa as a manufacturing state, a slave camp, and whatever we have now. This is what we call the left hand, the path of the machine. The returners wish to direct our course back to the fork in search of the right hand. She reached for her glass and finished it. That's the short version.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was beautiful. And I'm just thinking, the path not taken. The path not taken. Now, Jennifer, I think, just in the interest of time, I will ask you the next question. And, this one is, and I'm going to use another quote from Achille Mbembe's new book, Necropolitics, where he says, we draw from across fragmented time and geographies. Where and how do we locate ourselves? And, here I was thinking really around, dysfunctionality, whether it's in the characters. I know you have a lot of them in the reactive, and so you would be able to talk about it for long, but I will have to get back to the audience soon. But I wanted, I was thinking of a character like Missy in Chintu, and especially in terms of, I know yesterday you said you don't like this term post-colonial, using colonialism as our central point of reference. But Missy, for me, represents so many of these contradictions. Can you just tell us a little bit about him?
God, that's a long time ago.
Wow, I can help you if you forget.
I haven't read that book in 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, or
I would
any
like
characters
to ask,
of your
who
choice.
is Missy? I like the fact that you call it fragmented. But there's a generation of African writing that talked about the educated African as fragmented. And you remember that poem, Pianos and Drums? Okigbo? Yeah? The educated African, on one hand you hear the drums, and they are drawing you, reminding you of your mother and your childhood, and the panther. And then you hear a wailing piano, far, mourn-like, you know? And the educated African is lost in a mist, a morning mist between the piano and the drum. So that was in the 60s, that was the fragmented African who is no longer fitting into the traditional Africa, but doesn't fit in the West. But of course, as we've evolved, we are like, no, we fit in both. And we're loving it, you know, we exist. So you have Miss, who is of that generation because he was born in the 40s. And he is exceedingly intelligent. And by the way, I modeled him on Ezewolu in Hour of God. God, have you read Hour of God? Because it's Echebe's best novel ever. And I just wanted to say that, okay, you will find these minds that are the more they understand Western philosophy and literatures and whatever, the more they realize that they are African. You know, because the more you go deep, for me, the more I traveled into Europe, the more African I became. When I was in Uganda, I wasn't even bothered, you know? But now I'm so fanatically African, you know? So often these intellectuals, the more they travel into Western philosophies and understanding, the more they realize, oh my God, we had gold, which gold I've left behind. And sometimes for me, you know, all that knowledge and acquiring all that knowledge and coming back to Africa and saying to the villagers, I'm a doctor. And they ask, do you do injections? No. I say, what a waste of space, you know. And he realizes that, you know what, I want to be back not among the educated, but I want to go back among the people who are still living close to the land, close to our knowledge, and he doesn't fit in there. That's something can fragment the mind. But also, if you've read the collection of short stories, Christmas is Coming, the mother, Sikola, you know, she was in Uganda married to a pediatrician. I can never say that word properly. But, and it was a high status, yeah? So she goes to Britain with this pediatrician and she imagines he's going to get a fantastic job, they're going to be rich. He ends up working as security. And while he can handle it, you know, she fails, you know, and then she slowly goes into alcoholism. And in order to deal with it, she would come back drunk and take it on the family. And for some reason, the husband understood, okay? But the children didn't. And because I know people who read me, and those particular people, the people who are very educated, who are invested in Western world, and I'm saying, let's have a conversation about this. So Mrs. Me as well, okay? So let's have a conversation about this. How do we handle this knowledge? The past, they used to say, the African is lost. We are saying, no, we are comfortable. And yet, you still get these fragments.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that. No, because I was looking at, her character, Sikola, and her alcoholism, and then going across to the reactive and finding characters who, for them, alcohol is not even enough. They have to go, up to the next level and the next level. And then there's, disease, there's, AIDS, the epidemic comes, and people are totally, totally shattered. And I won't even ask you, Masande, about that, because I'll want everybody to go and take this novel and read some of, what he has written about post-apartheid South Africa and what happens to the young people. And why I'm leaving it there is because I want to ask you a last question, before we actually segue into a few questions from, the people who are here. And, it's actually going to be about language. Why about language? Is because Masande comes from a country that actually has 12 official languages. And sign language actually is included in there. And yet he writes in English, And I remember one of my friends, she's a professor at University of Witwatersrand, Grace Musila, envying the fact that you've got so many languages, seeing it as such a plus because of the ways in which, for some of us, a lot of these languages, were totally sidelined. And so we actually don't have them as languages for use in the same way that you do, okay? So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. And then, of course, I was reflecting from a Kenyan writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, whom I love. And Ngugi has called himself a language warrior. He has just, and here I was listening to Mshai yesterday, Mshai, who's sitting over there, talking about the 1962 Makerere Conference on African Writers of English Expression. And of course, Ngugi was at that conference in 1962, and I think has been the most consistent carrier of this torch, okay? And so he's just published a new book called The Language of Languages. And he says, if languages had a common language, that language would be called translation. And yesterday we were enjoying, translation on this stage. So he says, the colonizers consciously and deliberately kill the language of the people they have conquered. And their own languages are a means of conquest, okay? So this is how he's now, thinking about language. And so I'm going to ask you, about that. And then, Jennifer, I will ask you a specific question as well. Okay? So could you just reflect a little bit?
Sure. While it is true that these languages have been preserved and there is still a lot of fluency around them, it's also a double-edged sword. Because what happened actually historically is that part of what colonization and later apartheid did was to discover South Africa and then find a diversity of peoples there. And one of the methodologies was, of course, the very common one of divide and conquer. So what they did was create Bantustans, or homelands, which were artificial states that were actually propped up to be independent and divided amidst ethnic lines. And while the actual real South Africa, which had any sort of economic heft, was regarded white South Africa, which is part of the irony of South Africa's history, actually, because technically, in the late 80s, I was born in East London, which was then within the homeland, but because it had a port and was a coastal city, it was regarded white South Africa, but my mother could not take residence there after I was born, and we had to drive back to the homeland, where I spent my first years in the township. So these languages have persisted and they exist, but regardless, the languages in which people trade in, the languages that are most predominant in our education systems remain English, as well as Afrikaans, which is a mixture of Dutch and the language that was actually appropriated from the indigenous people of the Western Cape. So until, I think, the late 90s or early 2000s, even when you used ATM machines, the choices were either in Afrikaans or English. Yeah, and famously Afrikaans, of course, was the language of the apartheid regime, and there were student protests against it. So now we find ourselves in a precarious position where our languages persist, but in order to pursue upward mobility and agency in the world, parents encourage their children to assimilate in order to make their way in the world. And also, very interestingly, what died with the Homelands as well was a literature that existed in indigenous languages. And part of the project, the novel that I'm working on now, actually is kind of an alternative history that imagines if Xhosa literature actually didn't disappear from the mainstream, right? So it exists as a language, but it's not consumed as a literature. So it's not an instrument that contributes to public discourse and thinking. And I'm trying to think my way into what that means, actually, right? To be able to transact with English, which is hegemonic, but to not actually carry the sensibility of one's own tongue into this future, which is becoming obviously propagated as well with the introduction of technology, which also underrepresents other languages in comparison to, English, which is dominant.
Wow. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Now, Jennifer, and I'm for you. I'm taking off from from yesterday where you said sometimes you throw in a word of Luganda and you don't bother to explain it because after all these the English people didn't really explain a lot of the terminology. And as you actually said that yesterday, I was thinking of the Scottish writer, what's his name, who wrote How Late It Was, How Late. And I said, oh my goodness, yeah, because reading that book with all the swear words was really a study for me. But, what I wanted to ask you is, in what language do you think when you write the past? And, what is your relationship with English as you write it, when you're in diaspora, when you're in Manchester? And lastly, what's your relationship? And all this is, at the same time, what's your relationship with Luganda?
Okay.
So
let me answer each because I'm going to forget them. Okay. So, what language do I think in? It's funny because I'm not aware of a language in my mind. No, thoughts occur. But what I know is that often when I'm writing Buganda, because it can't be Uganda, before the arrival of Europe, we have a certain music in Uganda called Kadongo Kam, and it's totally Ugandan. But also music up to probably the 70s. They also spoke a certain Luganda. And often I have that music blasted in the house. Or sometimes when I'm on the train or traveling, I have. Because then it activates, that language is there in the back of my mind because my grandparents spoke it and my parents spoke it. And sometimes when I meet people in Britain who left Uganda in the 70s, they still speak that Luganda because they've not upgraded because language keeps moving. So that music and sometimes even videos that were recorded in the past, they just activate that English. And when I'm writing, so for example, when I was writing Chintu, the first part, I had to just be there and be my grandfather and how he spoke. And my grandmother, I didn't even go into my father's world, okay? And then the other oral traditional stories, they're all in Luganda. So I went there. there were sayings as well. So, and probably at that point, everything in my mind is acting in Luganda, is coming out in Luganda. But also there's a longing in me that I lost Luganda when I came to Britain. Because I noticed, as soon as I arrived at Entebbe Airport, and I'm telling you, it's the most disorganized airport in the world. But I arrive and the woman is walking in a particular Ugandan way. I say, you go there. Do you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm home. And suddenly, it's unbelievable. But suddenly the chaos, the disorganization is all mine. It belongs to me. So it's that sort of thing that happens to me when I'm writing that kind of world. And it doesn't matter who. All those characters that I've written, I inhabit them. Because how else can I write them? And so, as I said yesterday, they are all speaking my language. And therefore, they must occur to me in my language. But sometimes even the narrator, because the narrators are not British. They are, my ancestors. And I'm talking about the omniscient narrator. For me, the omniscient narrator is my ancestor. Because they tell our stories. How could, I don't know. So I still hear them speaking orally. We are sitting somewhere and this omniscient narrator is telling the story and I'm out there. Or I'm them. And therefore the language cannot remain the same. Because if they inhabit the same body, if they are in Uganda, therefore they can't speak the kind of English. Yeah. And that has set me free. Because the editing of my work, they are very careful. Because they are, you can't say that, according to who? In Uganda we do.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
So it's that sort of thing, being in place, even though I'm in Britain, being in a character, even though I'm in this body, and I write.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, and so I think thank you so much for this rich discussion that I must open up out now to the people in the room. If anybody has kind of like really burning. Okay, I saw your hand first, and then you. Okay, yeah, whichever order. Okay, so we'll have the two ladies and the gentleman in the corner.
Oh, hi. I have a question for each one of you. First, I'll start with Masande, and I'm curious about redemption and transformation in relation to home. And I'm asking this because I'm reading The Reactive, and there's the characters whose names I'll not pronounce because I'm afraid to mess them up publicly. And they're leaving home. Lindenathi, I think. He leaves home because there's something that has happened that he's blaming himself about. And in this way, there's a disruption that's happening. But then he has to come back. When he's away, there's just disruption happening in his life. And now he has to come back, or he gets back home at some point to look for redemption, because home is where redemption is, I would like to imagine. And so my question is, first, I'd just like you to comment about redemption and how we are transformed when we leave home, and how we get back home and also transformed again by going back home or by being home. And so I'm just curious about the interaction between redemption, transformation in home. And then for Jennifer, and the context is that you grew up in Uganda and now you're in Britain. And what tends to happen when for me at least, when I was living abroad, is that we attempt to replace home by a community. Like we try to seek home in communities. And so the first question for you, Jennifer, is I'm curious to know, what communities did you seek out when you got to Britain? I mean, whatever communities, it could be literary communities, you could be belonging to AA if you want to reveal that, or any other thing, That's one. And the follow-up question is, collective homes, the concept of multiplicity within these homes, within these collective homes, like in a community, what it means to different people. I don't know if it makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll take all 3 questions, if it's okay. And please try and keep your question brief and just say your name before you ask your question. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Nyarinda. My question goes to our host and both our authors. I know we are imagining African futures and stuff like that. I'm interested in knowing your thoughts on the use of artificial intelligence in drafting African stories. Thank you.
Oh.
Hi, and thank you for your submission. My name is Trevor. I'm from Uganda as well. I can corroborate Jennifer's claims about Entebbe. My question is also to the theme today of imagining futures and maps. You know, part of the crisis when we interacted with the rest of the world was that our ways of life did not prove sufficient to defend themselves in the face of external threats. And oftentimes when we speak about returning to some sort of source or rediscovering an authentic African way of being, we imagine it in some sort of vacuum that doesn't account for real material threats to our biological existence. So my question then is, in your imagination, in the intellectual work and questions you're grappling with, do you think about the question of strategic security? We want to be in the world in a particular way. But from very recent history, we know that there are those who have designs on us who will not hesitate to try to undermine our ways of being for their own benefit. So in whatever way we romanticize the future, think about it, try to strategize out of our present impasse, the question of how we guarantee that whatever way of life we choose to live by can be defended, and defended firmly against any external threats, doesn't seem to always get addressed. So I want to ask the both of you, how do you factor that in? We can want to be in any way, but can it stand the test of external threat that has previously overrun us, like many other colonial societies around the world? Thank you.
That is such a Ugandan question.
I'll leave that one to you. Thank you, Gloria. We met yesterday. I think what's interesting about the novel and its themes of redemption, I think, is that, you know, I like to write about characters, actually, and about relationships. And often I see that it emerges from the work that their lives are often dictated by the systems that they live under. And with the reactive, just like Jennifer was mentioning earlier, there is this tension between tradition and modernity. Of course, when Linda Nati leaves home, he also evades his initiation ceremony, which is something that sends him in flight, and he's alienated, actually, from his home, from Makoseni, and he's this unit that's floating around in this metropolis in Cape Town, untethered from family and untethered from culture as well. But it's important, I guess, for him, because part of it is how he is meant to actually forge his own identity through figuring out what to do between these two extremes. And of course, in the end, not to spoil it, but we discover that, you know, firstly, he's always carried home with him. And that alienation, what he thought he was banished for, is something that home could actually accommodate, you know, much more than, you know, the modern society, even though he remains in a modern society, but much more than the strangers, you know, that he meets along the way. So as much as it's a story about these two brothers and a story about family and being accepted back into your family after you've done something that feels like an egregious crime, it's also about reconciling his own kind of relationship with tradition and his ethnicity, and him defining what masculinity is for himself, actually. So yeah, I was very invested in his redemption, and when it happened that way, I was surprised but happy for him, I guess. Answer the second question?
Just very briefly,
Yeah,
because
briefly.
we're actually being told.
Firstly, no one understands exactly how machine learning works, and what it does, though, is use an available data set. So our ways of thinking and customs are under-documented on the internet. So to actually ask the machine, to prompt it to write something African actually falls way outside of the ambit of what it's able to do. And in fact, in the first trials, they had to pull it back because ChatGPT was actually extremely racist. I think in terms of preserving our ways of life against extended threat, we're going to need the collaboration of those people that we've seated into power. They're the ones who interact with our biggest threats. And like I was saying with Ntshanga work, it's our own government, actually, that says that these people should drill in the ocean because ancestors are ghosts, and that is fictional. Or they should cut down these trees, or bees don't matter. So I think if those two sections of society can actually work together, it can be consolidated, and we might have some chance in the future of being protected while also preserving our ways of life.
God help me if I remember the questions. The first one was, did I join in a Ugandan community? Yes, I did, when I first arrived, and was still frightened, you know, because that's where you find all sorts of ways, which jobs to do, where to find a house, how to work on the visa renewal. So I joined the Ugandan community. We have a Ugandan community in every British city. And sometimes at the end of the year, we get together. Yeah, because the whole thing about that is the fear of being swept away. Because when you arrive there, you know. I can give you an example. One time, I gave a student a C, in creative writing, and she thought creative writing was the easy choice, so she would pass because she did very well in writing composition. Anyway, she came to my class, and I gave her a C, and she told me, Jennifer, I've never got less than an A in any of my work. I said, welcome to creative writing. But in order to punish me, she wrote me an email and used my first name, my name, Nansubuka. Like, you dare not use our English name, Jennifer. The first thing I said, thank you for trying to use my name. As long as you pronounce it well, that will be fine. But this is when you arrive and you've been walking around as Jennifer, and someone reminds you that, no, it's not your name, actually, you know? And then you go looking for your community, you know? And you join, because, you know, even this language you speak is not yours. And then this is why you hear people say, my parents never taught me my first language, you know, in Europe, because somebody has claimed that language for themselves. So yes, I joined a Ugandan community. Of course, we fell out, and I walked away. But they had nurtured me, they had looked after me, and they pushed me into that world, which is fantastic. There was a second part to your question? In the collective homes that I've, yes, I've acquired a certain, after so many years in Europe, I've acquired personalities. If you find me in class, the way I speak is very different. And whatever, I am Dr. Makumbi. Don't joke with me. I'm very, but out here, I wouldn't hear anybody call me doctor, because out there they can be like, are you? And I'm like, yeah, Dr. Makumbi for you. And then at home, people don't even know I have a PhD. There's no respect, you know. But also, these multiplicities don't come just with place, but also with language. So again, and I noticed this when my mother came to visit me in Britain. And she arrived too early. I wasn't ready to collect her. And so somebody rang me and said, there's an old woman here, she's given me your number. And I went, but I found her talking to this white man. And she was doing, and then we jumped into the plane. And we flew, and then and I just froze. And I had never realized how much I speak with, so the British, they speak with just the tongue, you know, the mouth. They don't do gestures very much. So one time I was in a bus and we almost crashed into somebody. And we all went and we came back and we settled. I turned around, you know, waiting. You know what we do? Can you imagine? This is stupid. They just looked. I thought, my goodness, I was about to die with you guys. That is the moment we get to know each other. No. But as I slowly realized that when I come home, I'm back. I don't only speak with my mouth. The eyes are rolling, the neck is going, and then, you know, so my mother reminded me, you know, she jumping into the plane and they fly and land. But that is the way I speak. And as soon as I get home, this British speaking, whatever, goes away. And as soon as I go back to Britain, my husband would say, oh, you're speaking Ugandan English. Because he's British. But I wouldn't realize, because, you know, as soon as I go home, everybody's speaking Ugandan English. And I slowly fall back into it, because that's where it came from. So there's a multiplicity of me, you have no idea, you know. Oh yeah, can you imagine me handing over my sentence to a machine? Do you know how hard I work to get the rhythm, the language? How can whatever, chop, I can't even say. I can't imagine handing it over. And I think we might be safe from our job. We are safe from being annihilated by
For
machines.
once.
I know. Especially, unless some clever African, you know what they're like. Some clever African is going to come up with an app and put in our languages. But before they do that, there's no way you can read a book written by a machine and you can't tell. Because, they are fed. So I haven't even bothered to worry about that, and I don't know how it works. And finally, the Ugandan. So how have we protected ourselves from, when we imagine the futures, how have we thought about how Africa will protect itself from, I always look at the world as the Serengeti, because I watch a lot of those videos, because I've been writing about it. And I think the human world is not different from the Serengeti. They are the gazelles, then they are the lions, then they are whoever. And for a long time, we've been the gazelles, okay? And these worlds have come and have just eaten and eaten and eaten. So in the book that I'm working with, I'm probably out of anger, probably out of frustration. I've just gone ruthless. I mean, ruthless. Okay, first of all, the West is declining in my book. Population collapse. The West is eating itself. It's cutting its intestines with, those weapons of mass destruction are not going to help at all. So the West is declining, but also it's been paying too much attention to China. So Africa started sneaking its way because nobody expects Africa to do anything anyway. Why watch it? But what I've done is to bring back all those. Some of the people were sold into slavery. Okay, the descendants, and they've come back with a mentality from there, and they are very angry. Not only with us who sold them, but those who enslaved them, and they are ruthless. They cut down, because for them it is, we've squandered the motherland. First we allowed the Europeans to do whatever they wanted, and then we let in Russia. So now they are coming back to restore it. Okay? But any politician, you don't stand in their way, they kill. Because I can't see any other way. You know, Africa is not going to say to the West, give us our fair share of the global cake so that we can sell our coffee, we can sell, no. You know, so they have had coups in Africa. Oh, we are going to have coups in the West, especially if they are declining. So I've gone absolutely nuclear in the next book.
Thank you.
Love it.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that. Now, I know, Nyarina, you did say, and the host, which is me, and all I was going to say was that one of my major preoccupations at the moment, and I teach, I get students, you know, going online and handing in essays that they've just downloaded, and now with chat, it's crazy. I don't know what we're going to do. But outside of that, I'm thinking digital colonization, which is staring us in Kenya in the face, and digital slavery, you know, going forward. So, you know, this digital highway is very, very precarious as far as I'm concerned. But I realized I forgot to introduce myself, because as I looked out, I saw familiar people, and I thought, of course, I know so-and-so, so they know me. But my name is Garnette Oluoch-Olunya, and yes, Garnette is a good Kenyan stone. I was named by my dad, and so I'm clinging on to it. And I sit at the Go Down Art Center, from which we got our futuristic piece. And this is from one of the artists, the sculptor Maggie Otieno. And the head there just reminded me of, because yesterday you were asking, how do we imagine outer space? And you know, that reminded me of the aliens from the 70s. So I thought, oh, and then with their Masai shuka that's actually made out of wood, you know, that's taken out of the railway sleepers before we got the new railway. So, you know, for me, this actually spoke to, again, you know, where we are at the moment. But I'd like us to thank our two writers, because they have given more than I could have imagined. More than I could have imagined. Yeah. Please get a hold of their books out there. When I first saw this, that is a pyramid over there. You know, when I was thinking of the triangulum, and I thought about the repatriation debate that's ongoing, that a lot of our treasures have been sitting in museums abroad, and now they're being digitized. There's a digital exhibition from the British Museum as we speak, you know, that's looking at Tutankhamun's tomb. And they've gone right in a desecration of the human and the god, okay? So things are happening, you know, as we speak, and they are online. In fact, I attended the exhibition in the comfort of my own home. So, you know, totally amazing. So on that note, I think I will ask us again to please give a wonderful round of applause to our big speakers. Thank you.